Senator Ted Cruz is our guest, and we have a lot to get to in very little time, so I'm going right into it. First of all, you have been very critical of the Democrats sandbagging the coronavirus relief checks and the relief efforts. Where are we on that?
Well, we don't seem to be much of anywhere. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer continue to want to play partisan games with it. I think they've made a political judgment that doing nothing is in their best interest politically, that they think it helps select Joe Biden if as many Americans as possible are out of work, are stuck at home, are broke, or unemployed, and are pissed off. I think Pelosi and Schumer are gambling that people that are pissed off are going to be angry at the polls and are going to vote against the president. And I think that's a very cynical decision, but that sure seems to be the decision they're making.
I agree. Where do you think we are with COVID-19? I don't think we have a vaccine in time to make a difference, but it's disturbing to me that could have such a great influence on the election unless we can open things back up.
Yeah. Look, I think we have to open things back up. I think it is the single most important question for the economy, for people's lives, is how do we get people back to work? How do we get kids back to school? How do we get the economy moving again? And COVID-19, one of the things that I found strange about this whole pandemic is how bizarrely politicized it has been from the outset.
Yeah.
My view is this is a dangerous disease, and we ought to treat it seriously. And that means we ought to use common sense and exercise reasonable steps to slow the spread. So, when I travel, when I'm on an airplane, I'll wear a mask, and I try to use social distancing and wash my hands and use hand sanitizer and do all sorts of things that are reasonable preventative steps to slow the spread of it. But at the same time, the policy solution of the Democrats just shut the entire country down, destroy people's life savings, destroy small businesses. I don't think that makes any sense at all, and it really is. It's wreaking enormous havoc and causing enormous suffering.
I think you're right. Talking of what the Democrats are willing to do to use this virus to their political advantage, mail-in balloting, something we never talked about before. Leaving aside absentee, mail-in balloting, something we never talked about before. And pretty much anyone who knows anything about this says you're opening this thing up to fraud, inefficiencies,
Yep.
dragging the results out. We're not. This is not going to get legs, is it?
Well, I think it will get legs in Democratic jurisdictions. And so on the federal government level, I do not think you're going to see any federal legislation that provides for universal mail-in voting because it is far too subject to voter fraud. It's far too easy for unscrupulous political operators to try to steal people's votes. Now, I think that's also a big part of the reason why the Democrats want it, is that's precisely what they're after. On the federal level, I don't think the president is going to sign anything that allows universal mail-in voting, and I hope and don't believe that a Republican Senate would sign off on it. But what we will see is in blue states, in states where the Democrats control them, I think we're already seeing more and more states moving to expanding mail-in voting, and that threat of voter fraud is real. And at this point, the best solution, because we're 78 days away from the election, the best solution at this point is win by a big enough margin that they can't steal the election.
Your friend Congressman Jim Jordan said if you can protest in person, you can vote in person. And we saw this weekend massive protests in favor of this mail-in balloting in the post office lobby.
Now, it's asinine and it's obviously political. I mean, if you look at people are going, you go to the grocery store, you go to the pharmacy. Some people are traveling and flying airplanes. You can go places in person, and you take reasonable precautions. There's no reason on earth why you can't show up and vote in person and show an ID and do all of that. How is it that voting is more complicated and more dangerous than buying a pack of hot dogs? And, every time I go to the grocery store, There are people there that are shopping. And in Texas, at least, for seniors, absentee balloting is a process that is allowed for people if you've got significant health reasons that you can't leave. That's a different story. And you have absentee balloting that is constrained where it's necessary for health reasons. But anytime you have mail-in voting, you have an increased risk of voter fraud. And if you look at it in the state of Texas, the history behind, we have fairly strict rules governing absentee balloting, and some of that actually was adopted when Democrats controlled the Texas legislature, because there was a bad pattern, particularly in South Texas, of unscrupulous operatives stealing votes in Democratic primaries. So the interesting thing is that many of our restrictions on absentee ballots were actually put in place by Democratic legislators who were worried about voter fraud in their own Democratic primaries. And it's a problem. You know, you think about it. If you have, let's talk about this practically, something called ballot harvesting. If you have someone, for example, go through a nursing home and give every person in the nursing home a blank ballot and then sit there and help them fill it out, and if you've got, someone who's a political operative to tell the folks in the nursing home, okay, you vote for Joe Biden right here, and they do that, and let's say some of the people don't. They say, no, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. Look, one of the real risks then is those ballot harvesters take all the ballots that were for Donald Trump and they throw them in the trash, and they send in only the ballots that vote the way they want to. That's the real specter of voter fraud, and it's something I think the Democrats are trying to maximize, and I think anyone concerned about the integrity of the election should want to see reasonable steps to prevent.
The Chinese CCP has been very involved in this coronavirus cover-up, I would consider it. Secretary of State Pompeo saying that this is our greatest threat, the Chinese government, and they're being very aggressive. And this week they call for Chinese sanctions on you personally as a United States Senator, something that Democrats should join with Republicans in repudiating. Where are we on this?
Well, no, that's exactly right. That China has announced sanctions directed to me personally, barring me from traveling to the nation of China. And I got to tell you, Michael, I take those sanctions as a badge of honor. I have said for a long time that I think China poses the single greatest geopolitical threat to our country for the next century. And in the Senate, I have been fighting, trying to get the United States to take the threat of Chinese military aggression, economic aggression, theft of intellectual property, propaganda, to take all of that threat more seriously and defend ourselves. And until recently, there were a whole lot of skeptics in Washington. You had most Democrats and, frankly, a lot of Republicans who dismissed the threat of the Communist Party of China, said it wasn't that serious and we should just get in bed with the communists. And I think that was a serious mistake then. And in my view, the most significant long-term foreign policy consequence of the coronavirus pandemic is a fundamental reevaluation of the United States' relationship with China and of the world's relationship with China. They are an evil, malign, murdering, torturing, totalitarian dictatorship. Their cover-up played a very direct role in the lives that have been lost to coronavirus, and I think we need to be serious in standing up and defending ourselves against Chinese aggression.
Antifa, BLM, these groups have taken to the streets. They've violence against police, violence against property, violence against passengers in cars and folks who are walking home. They've more violence this weekend. Should there be a federal response? What is the answer when local communities are defunding the police?
Well, it's a manifestation, unfortunately, of just how extreme the Democratic Party has gotten. That in the age of Donald Trump, the far left is getting angrier and angrier. They hate the president with every ounce of their consuming passion. And they're embracing extreme positions, things like defund the police. If I'd have gone on your show 3 months ago and said the Democrats are going to defund the police, you'd have laughed at me. You'd have said, "Look, come on, Ted, that's a little out there. Nobody's advocating for that." But that's where they are right now. That is, those are the extremes. And this shouldn't be common. This shouldn't be complicated. It's basic common sense. You and I and everybody, we've got a right to protest. We've got a right to free speech. We can stand out in the street, say anything we want. But what you don't have a right to do is assault a fellow citizen. What you don't have a right to do is firebomb a police car or loot a small business or destroy a small business or murder a police officer. And just a couple of weeks ago, I chaired a hearing on Antifa violence and domestic terrorists engaged in violence. And we had 7 Democrats participated in that hearing. Not a single Democratic senator out of all 7 was willing to condemn Antifa or even say a negative word about them. And they've decided that these angry, violent terrorists are their base, and they're not going to dare contradict them. Now, you ask, what can we do about them? One thing we can do is pass legislation I've introduced called the Reclaim Act, which is legislation that provides that if you are physically injured or if your property, your home, or your business is damaged or destroyed in a riot, and local officials have made the decision to withdraw police protection, to pull it back and deny you police protection, that you have a federal cause of action to sue the local mayor, the local officials, and recover treble damages because they're denying your civil rights if they're refusing to protect your life and protect your property. And so that's one thing we could do, is actually stand up with the citizens who are being abandoned by local Democrats who are refusing to do their jobs.
I want to take them separately. Kamala Harris first and Joe Biden second. You served in the Senate, or Kamala Harris served in the Senate alongside you. Your thoughts on her as the choice, and what does this do for the ticket?
So I'm not surprised Kamala was the choice. I thought she would be the VP pick all along. Actually, I thought she'd be the nominee to begin with. And I think she's a formidable choice. I think conservatives need to recognize that number one, it is historic as an African-American woman, and then that is historic and potent. But number two, that she is a talented communicator, that she laughs easily, that she can come across as charming, and that the media is going to, and they are right now, is going to engage in a total love fest with her that is every bit as dangerous as Barack Obama was when he started running. And so I think we should not underestimate the threat of that. Now, in terms of substance and policy, I think she is every bit as radical as the most extreme voices in her party. That Kamala, you look at her voting record, it's been the most liberal in the United States Senate. There is not an issue. I serve on the Judiciary Committee with her. There's not an issue on which she is unwilling to demagogue and go to the extreme left. She was part of the Democratic smear attack on Brett Kavanaugh. And so when it comes to the angry voices in the streets burning our cities, Kamala is very much with those extreme angry voices.
Joe Biden, you have noted this past week, having been a very successful presidential candidate yourself, is unwilling or unable to go before the media and answer questions at press conferences, and you have called him out for that. You're not ready to be president if you can't answer questions. Do you believe he is in a state of significant cognitive decline based on your experience?
Look, I think he has lost a step, but I actually worry, Michael, that conservatives are overstating the level of cognitive decline. In that a lot of, look, we've got problems of echo chambers in our country where everyone on the right talks to ourselves, everyone on the left talks to themselves, and we don't communicate across those lines very much. And when it comes to Joe Biden, I think he has clearly lost a step. But frankly, Joe was saying stupid things when he was in his 20s. I mean, Joe has always stuck his foot in his mouth. That's not new. And that has been part of his entire career. And what I worry is that conservatives have convinced themselves that he's full on senile and he can't handle the television remote control, and that we're setting ourselves up for if and when there is a debate, that the standard for success for Joe will have been defined so low that if he can stand up and get 3 consecutive sentences out of his mouth, everyone will be astonished and say, "Oh, look, he's great." So I worry that we put too much stock. He did debates in the Democratic primaries, and he was fine. He's not a great debater, but he was fine, and he held his own against a vicious and pretty crazy primary field. Now, I do think the Democrats have made a strategic decision, which is they think they're winning. They think right now, if the election were today, Joe Biden would win. And that's why they're leaving Joe Biden in the basement. They don't want to do anything to change that. They don't want him to say anything, so he doesn't take any media questions. He doesn't do press gaggles. When I was running for president, I did a press gaggle where all the reporters would stand there, and I'd just take open questions from them. I did it just about every day, and most of the questions were hostile. But you know what? These issues are important, and even though I think most of the reporters are heavily biased, I also think they have a job to do, and if you're going to engage and lead the country, you've got to be prepared and willing to accept that scrutiny. And it is amazing to me that the media is just behaving like bleeding sheep and accepting that the Democratic nominee for president is hiding in his basement. But you know what? They're all voting for Joe Biden, so they're okay with the strategy.
Last question. I know you got to go, but you're working very hard over the next 78 days to get Republicans elected. Talk a little bit about what you're doing.
This election, every 4 years people say this is the most important election of our lifetime. I've never seen an election like this. I think our country has gone, too many people in our country have gone crazy. And to see rioting in the streets, to see 51 million people having lost their jobs, I think if the Democrats win, if we wake up in January with a Biden, Schumer, Pelosi government, the damage they will do to this country in 2 years will exceed everything done by Barack Obama in 8 years. And so I'm doing everything I can, number one, to help President Trump get reelected. And I'm campaigning with the president. I'm working to turn people out and to focus on the policy record of results. And we've had a real record of success. Now, obviously, the country has been hit a hard blow with this pandemic, but it wasn't Donald Trump in Wuhan serving bat soup. It was a pandemic that came from China, and the country has taken that blow and will come through that. Prior to the pandemic, the economy was booming, and we had the lowest unemployment in 50 years. We could do that again with sound policies. And so I'm fighting to help the president get reelected, number one. Number two, to help Republicans keep control of the Senate. I think if Democrats take control of the Senate, they'll end the filibuster and they'll implement radical policies. And number three, I'm working very hard to take the gavel out of Nancy Pelosi's hands, to end the Democratic control of the House. We had 2 years where we got real results for the American people, and all of that halted when the Democrats took control of the House. And so I'm out campaigning I've launched an initiative called 25 for 20, where I'm raising money for 25 House candidates all across the country, and I'm trying to turn out their voters. I'm doing rallies, and I'm raising several $1 million for those House candidates for them to spend in their campaigns to try to beat Democrats and retake the House.
Great work. Let's hope you're successful. Senator Ted Cruz, come back and see us soon.
Thank you, my friend. God bless.